My paper is on was Bhimrao, Ramji, Ambedkar, a free market economist. Actually, it's titled in the program schedule as Bhimrao, Ramji, Ambedkar, and Indian Economic Thought. Before I begin to my presentation, I'd like to make a few observations. A few years ago, I was reading I heard actually about Austrian Economics through the Road to Serfdom book by Hayek. And I read a small quote in that. That was the inspiration I get into Austrian Economics. And then I started reading about it a lot, and it was until 2005 when Part Shah, who was adjunct scholar of Mises Institute long ago, who organized an Austrian Economics seminar in Delhi. That was another turning point that I largely tend to read even more and questioning about who were the Indian Austrian economists. That was the starting point. Let me thanking by the Mises Institute for giving this opportunity to present my paper in this Austrian Economics Conference 2011. I would also like to thank people who have constantly encouraged me and also helped it in getting financial support for making this trip successful. Otherwise, it's very difficult to come from India. It's not that easy to find any Austrians in India in this juncture. I'd like to make three persons to be mentioned here. Nitin Pai, who is the founder of Takshila Institute. This institute is a free market institute. It's coming up very fast. And he's the editor of Prakriti, the Indian National Interest Review. And Atan Udayan, who is a liberal economist, and he writes a blog called Disha. And last but not least, Part Shah, who is the founder of Center for Civil Society. And there's, I would also like to mention that the only one economist who writes the letter and spirit of the Misesians is Souvik Chakravarti, who is largely inspired by youngsters in India. I would like to mention he's a mentor of mine, and after 2005, I was questioning myself after the Austrian Economics seminar, who are the Austrian economists in India? I was also doing my Master of Philosophy course in an institution named after Ambedkar, and it's called MAU, Military Headquarters of War in Western India. And he seems to be a scholar in Austrian economics, but there is no one who has actually recognized this person to the extent he should have been. And that's how my inspiration started to reading his works on early part of his writings before he became famous as a constitution maker in India. He's a guy with a young photo in 1912. And these are life and works. Basically, he got a fellowship for his master's program in Columbia. Later, he got into PhD. Then he goes on to England to get DSc and law. So he was a student of Seligman, Edwin Cannon, John Dewey, and he was a professor of political economy in the western part of India. Very brief period, and later also. And these are very few career options I'm mentioning here. Otherwise, he was a multi-personality person who have written a large amount of literature in comparative religion, economics, finance, and languages. And I'm mentioning these are the photo. But he was not known to what he actually written about in economics literature. He is now widely known as a father of Indian Constitution, as an icon of certain community, that's a Dalit, as a former untouchable, as first law minister in the independent Indian government. And he's also known for his argument with M.K. Gandhi and his conversion to Buddhism. He is largely misunderstood and misinterpreted on the views of socialism, Marxism, centralized planning, against bureaucracy, too much bureaucracy, establishment of RBI, Reserve Bank of India. This is a central bank in India. But otherwise, he has actually written large amount of literature on these aspects: free banking, gold standard, and individual liberty, private property. And he actually vehemently criticized Keynes' argument against gold standard, and he was in favor of gold exchange standard. Keynes was in favor of gold exchange standard, and he's actually tend to read Karl Manger's works. And I don't know, because this was, Ambedkar is writing these things in 1920s, 23 and 25. But the English version of the Karl Manger's works came into existence in 1950. But Ambedkar was in Germany briefly, and he was a student of Canon. And that goes on. And there are two other contributions he also made, but is tend to always forgotten. It's a decentralized planning and knowledge problems. These are the aspects which are completely ignored both in India and abroad. And there is no literature which tracks his views on these aspects. And these are major works, and the bold things are very major contribution, and it is very relevant to Austrian economics also. And the last one is very pioneering works on Indian banking and currency. This was his PhD thesis in London School of Economics under the guidance of Edwin Cannon. I want to mention to here that Cannon was not agreeing in most of the Ambedkar works, and he realizes that later he says that he agreed with him. And I would like to quote a few observations which he made in his foreword, saying that, as he is aware, I disagree with a good deal of his criticism. In 1993, I was one of the few economists who believed that the rupee could be kept at a fixed ratio with gold by the method that then proposed, and I did not fall away from the faith when some years elapsed without the desired fruit appearing. Article which he refers, Economic Review, July 1898. And I do not share Mr. Ambedkar's hostility to the system, not in our accept most of his argument against it and its advocates. But he hits some nails very squarely on the head, and even when I have thought him quite wrong. I have found a stimulating freshness in his views and reasons. An older teacher like myself learns to tolerate the vagaries of originality even when they resist. That was his observations. And later he said that in his practical conclusion, I am inclined to think that he is right. The single advantage offered to a country by the adoption of the gold exchange standard instead of the simple gold standard is that it is cheaper in the sense of requiring a little less value in the shape of metallic currency. Then he goes on to his argument in the book, saying that largely he agrees with him, but I suspect after reading this book, The Problem of the Rupee, it's not in a way. That's the argument which goes on the literature. And what are the major contributions made by Ambedkar is the constitutional liberty. He actually ensured in the Indian Constitution two important things which are also ignored by and large very unfairly, that the private property was ensured as a fundamental rights in the Indian Constitution in preamble, but unfortunately it was taken away in 1977 through 44th Amendment, and it still continues now, just like any other rights. And I've written one paper in 2006 is what published in a book. I argue bringing back to that property rights into the constitution, because there are a lot of issues which is nexus with that in India. And these are the other argument is a critique of Keynes on gold exchange standard. And remember, Keynes' first book was on Indian currency and finance, and he actually says in his preface that he was a radical in his own view, Ambedkar, but he says that I would be a moderate instead of saying a radical. But it seems to be that he was a radical. And he actually tracks the financing system of banking from 1800 to 1893 in his book. And he also criticizes many of the commission and the committees which are here. I would like to give a snapshot of few observations which he made that in different course of the time. This is during the Constitutional Assembly debate. Is that he was a very revolutionized with the three words, liberty, fraternity, and equality in the French traditions. And this was his talks in the parliament during the Indian draft constitution making. He says that there is no obligations to make the word socialism in the Indian constitution because people themselves would decide which system they would be in favor of or would be better off, and he leave it to them instead of saying that we should put this word in the Indian constitution. Unfortunately, again through 43rd amendment, later Indian government amended and they now put it the word socialism secular in the Indian constitution, which prohibits creating a free market political party. And there is a case is pending in the in the Bombay High Court last 15 years for taking away that options. Otherwise, there was a freedom party in India. That was a different case. And this is criticism on Rousseau's book, The Principles of Social Reconstruction. He actually refers Karl Manger's writings here also on the law of consumption. He actually extends the law of marginal utility, declining marginal utility. If you read this, it seems to be very fascinating that if you just if you read this being so that utility of an object varies according to the varying conditions of the organism needing satisfaction. Even an object of our strongest desire like food may please or digest according as we are hungry or have overindulged the appetite. The utility diminishes as satisfaction increases. This he goes on to say with the help of Gidding's observations. And this 2 point seems to be extending the law of consumption's stages. And this is a knowledge problem which he cites that in his writings in the Provincial Finance, saying that the centralized planning cannot have all knowledges. Read even planning commission cannot have all knowledges to plan for the whole country. It seems to be quite hierarchical, the law of the use of knowledge in the society's article. And there are only two persons who have actually read and wrote about Ambedkar works in India is the Professor Ambirajan and the later Mr. Jadhav. And this is a large quote I take help for giving a snapshot. This two quote gives the basic understanding of Indian currency and banking systems in a historical context. And if you read it, it was unfolding in a way that India was a silver standard country, and England, the British rule, is the gold standard. And I actually tend to give a view about what he has actually written instead of analyzing what he said about it and wrote about it in this paper. And he also he actually, Professor Ambirajan agree with Ambedkar, saying that the state should not have a power to print monopoly money, paper money. And he criticizes misunderstanding of currency systems and the discretion power with the government. And he's a other author who has actually written about him. There was a Bank of Bengal, Bank of Bombay, and Bank of Madras, where the bank had a freedom to or liberty to print their own currency. And he says that in his writing that was not largely used or scaled up in terms of using the liberty. But I suspect that because Jadhav worked with the RBI, Reserve Bank of India, for quite a long, and we have to be very careful what the central banker says. And this is the other argument which I said. And the other important point which I want to make here is that Ambedkar agreed with the gold standard. He actually defended in his writings that I think the gold standard must be accepted as the only system of currency in which is naive proof and full proof. Here, Edwin Cannon writes in his foreword that I'll just quote it for 2 lines, that the recent experience both of as we understood it before the war is not foolproof, but it is far nearer being foolproof and navy proof than the gold exchange standard. He goes on to state that it's not that near to say that, and he agree with that it's only foolproof. And Ambedkar tend to argue that the price rise in India was due to the supply of currency and not due to any other factors majorly. And is a Keynes criticism, Ambedkar criticism on Keynes, saying that in a way he was bypassing the whole debate. It's only 1 minute. I'll just go to last. This is the one argument which he says that in his paper 1924-25, a managed currency is to be altogether avoided when the management is to be in the hands of the government. When the management is by a bank, there is a less chance of mismanagement, for the penalty for imprudent issue or mismanagement is visited by disaster directly upon the property of the issuer. But the chance of mismanagement is greater when it is issued by the government, because the issue of government money is authorized and conducted by men who are never under any present responsibility for private laws in case of bad management or mismanagement. And this one paragraph summarizes what I want to say in this paper. And basically, he argues for these 4 important points. This is a small contribution which I think is important to make in coming years to understand the Indian perspective of Austrian economics. And there are few other economists also, not an per se economist, different personalities who have actually written about Austrian economics in India, but it's ignored by and large. Thank you. These are the big